Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. The webinar is presented by the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, a project of the Wisconsin Council of Churches and Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, which is funded in part by PACE, which stands for Philanthropy Active in Civic Engagement, and the Evju Foundation. We have a great line of speakers, but before we call on them, I want to cover a few housekeeping details. First, we're muting everyone but the speakers for the duration of the webinar. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end, but we ask that you submit your questions using the chat box. That's the little word balloon button at the bottom of your screen. Click on the button, type your question, sending it to everyone, and press return. We'll ask the speakers as many questions as we have time for, combining similar questions to save time and avoid repetition. Also, the webinar will be recorded and you'll be sent a link to the recording within the next few days. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Peter, Rabbi Margolis, and the entire Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice for being a moral compass in a time that we really needed, in a time where our communities are all trying to fight a righteous fight and we are trying to fight alongside you. It is good to have people who understand what true justice really means. And I do see a few more familiar faces in here, Barb McKinney, Ali Mudrow, Reverend Greg Lewis. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing much better than the last time we spoke. I think Alderman Ashanti Hamilton is supposed to be in here, and a number of other great community leaders. I didn't have the time on my iPad, so I didn't get the time to scroll through everybody. But the message of this webinar comes at a very important time for all of us, as was evidenced about an hour ago. And we're seeing firsthand the consequences of elections. We have a president who cares more about poll numbers and people's lives. And we see certain members of our congressional delegation who voted against the only relief bills that we have seen from the federal government. And our legislature, unfortunately, refuses to work with us or cooperate, as the administration does everything that we can do to fight the virus and save more lives here in the state of Wisconsin. And the Supreme Court just made a very unfortunate decision. And I got to talk just briefly about some of the rhetoric, because what we heard was that the health secretary overstepped her bounds. But the fact is, it's like, I don't know if they truly understand that we essentially have a wholly combined legislature and judiciary at this moment. And you can't legislate from the bench. And that's what's happening right now. And people are going to suffer as a result needlessly. And I think I get the most frustrated when people use scripture for political convenience and tend to ignore the things that have the largest impact on society. And Dr. Fauci just earlier this week warned about, Dr. Anthony Fauci just warned earlier this week about states reopening too soon and how there will be needless amount of lives that will be lost. And that's the warning that comes before destruction. And they didn't heed those words from the professionals, the science, the top research on infectious diseases. And we had done so well compared to our neighbors on a per capita basis. Is even, you look at Wisconsin versus in Iowa, that's the example I like to use, because, and I hate to have to use it because a life loss is a life loss. But Iowa has about half of our population. They had 3 times as many people die as Wisconsin as of about a week ago. And everything we did was to work to make sure that we continued that path of saving lives. And we had met 5 of the 6 metrics to get to phase 1 of the Badger Bounce Back plan. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Myself, I am a person of faith. I will be prayerful, as I always am, but especially in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, as we should brace ourselves. I am hoping that they're right, just given the decision that was made. I am hoping that this is the time to open it up, because if things do open, we have to not just hope, we have to work for the best. And that means still encouraging and working with local government to make sure that leaders in cities, counties, municipalities, and tribal government still answer the call that the people that they represent are making. And so it's easy sometimes to feel hopeless, especially when leaders aren't doing what they should be doing to help people. And the problem is that creates a certain sense of apathy, and that apathy is translated into voter apathy in certain times, especially in times of crisis. But I remember from my very first organizing job, when I was just knocking on doors, getting people to vote, the person that trained me as an organizer said that there's no such thing as voter apathy, only bad organizers. So that should charge us to do even more, to be more steadfast in the work that we're doing. And we can't settle for less at a time like this, because the people who are making the decisions that put power and money over people, they want us to feel helpless. They want us to feel like there's nothing that we can do. They want us to feel like our voices don't matter, or that you may not count. But that's how they stay in power. And that's how they further to entrench all the inequity that continues to exist in our society. They are depending on you, they're depending on voters of color, young people, low income folks, and other marginalized people to sit down and be quiet. So that means we all have to do the opposite. If we don't find ourselves in any of those categories, that means we have to stand up and speak for those who fall along those lines of marginality in society. And so we saw this in the spring election, April 7th, that how political power is prioritized over folks' fundamental right to vote, and people needlessly put their lives at risk. We see Black and brown voters who were told that their voices didn't count and probably should just stay home, essentially. And while Wisconsin's Black and Latino community make up about 15%, about 13% of the state's population, we see the two groups making up over half of the infections in our state. And so it's easy to say there's not a problem if it's easy for them to say that there's not a problem if the problem doesn't look like them, if they don't live amongst the problem, if they don't exist where the problem actually lies. And people, you can go back to the election, people found a way to make it happen, but they shouldn't have had to. But that's why everyone who is able to vote needs to have a plan to prepare and ensure that your votes are counted, and also have a plan to help somebody else figure it out. And so as we fight this virus and we all move forward to recovery, we need the voices of faith and justice more than ever now. We need you to be heard and we need every governing body at every level to hear from you, from your school boards to your United States senators, all the way to the White House, because we can only make change happen when we speak up, when we organize, and we do the right thing. So it's a very somber time at the moment, just given just the gravity of what we're dealing with and the Supreme Court and the legislature's response to this moment. And I hope that people don't leave this webinar discouraged. I hope people leave here challenged, charged to do even more. So I want to thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate being with you, and I look forward to partnering with you all with a lot of the work that we have to do.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And next we will hear by recording from Reverend Everett Mitchell, Judge with the Dane County Circuit Court.
Good evening. My name is Judge Everett Mitchell. I am a Dane County Circuit Court judge, as well as senior pastor of Christ the Solid Rock Baptist Church. I've been asked to kind of give my thoughts and my ideas related to voting and its importance and significance, especially as a faith leader and a person of faith who has chosen to use my faith to help motivate my entrance into my judicial role. I kind of got to first back up and say that I've been in the ministry since the age of 15 years old, and I was called to preach at a young age. And a lot of the experiences that I saw during that time, especially both in church and in community, always gave me a drive to make sure that my faith was connected to something practical, that the work that I was doing was going to make an impact on the lives of individuals. And so even as a young person, I was always committed to, the ideals of justice, ideals of fairness and equity. And even though I didn't have mentors around me who were elected officials or who had chosen to be in elected offices, I did realize that at some point there might be a need for me to think differently about how do we activate and how do we use things more appropriately. For me, the idea of voting really hit home by the time I got to Morehouse College, because that's when I was really exposed to a lot of the civil rights icons. Obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was an alumnus of Morehouse, was really a focus at the school. And it brought us into a space where we were thinking more strategically about how do you access power, how do you use your power to be critical about systems that oppress people, how do you deal with systemic oppression, how do you break it apart, how do you reorganize it, how do you organize against it, and how do you rebuild it so that those who are the most oppressed could be the ones who are able to find their voice and use their voice for the power or change that they wanted to see in the world. I remember reading Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, and he raised a fundamental question. He asked this question like, what does the Bible have to say, and more specifically, what does Jesus have to say to the people whose backs are against the wall? And so when you think about the role that voting plays, it is a significant aspect of standing up and using our voices in the manner in which my ancestors really required for us to do so. They sacrificed, they gave their lives. And as a faith leader, I think it's important upon me to make sure that I continue to push my community to do the same thing. The Black National Anthem definitely says, lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings. And so those ideals of voting is about lifting every voice, making sure that every voice is counted, and then working together in the world to ensure that we push hard to ensure that these voices are heard, and that systems don't marginalize or use what they can to keep people at home, but that we use our voices and consistently use our voices to see the impact can be made. When I decided to run for judge, I was already the senior pastor of Christ of Solid Rock, and I've been pastoring the church for about 4 years. And the idea of using my law degree, I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with my law degree and Princeton from seminary. And so I realized that I spent all this time, nurturing a law degree. What was I going to use it for? And that's when the idea of running for judge became very important, because watching men and women go through the court system as a prosecutor, I realized that a lot of them didn't have the support or voices that they needed to, advocate for themselves. And it's important to have representation so that when people walked into the bench or walked into a courtroom and saw the bench, that they saw somebody that represented them, looked like them, and in some places, and hopefully understood their conversation. And by that, when I say understood their conversation, it's important to know that those experiences throughout the world matter. And as a trauma survivor and as a man, a person of color who grew up in poverty and understands the struggles, I also understand that sometimes individuals have a sense that they don't trust these systems, and sometimes rightly so. So choosing to stand up and run for a elected position really was me deciding that I needed to be more proactive in being in the system so that I could be the person who is both looking forward but also looking within and seeing other systemic things that can be made to change as long as I'm in that position. Initially, I didn't see it, but as soon as I took the bench, I started to realize that even as a judge, you can make sure that you are using your power to make change in a very significant way. And that's what I've come to summarize is that, power is given in these positions. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to do with the power that has been given? And that power, I've chosen to make sure that I use that power to support children and families and really rework our system so that we see the children and we're not always trying to just protect those who have positions. Why is that important? Because it's the most vulnerable of us that really do need that support. And in these positions, I get to combine both a faith that everybody knows about, but also a passion for the law, which I think is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. And combining both of them allows me to stand in the vein in which my community has always been. We've always been a people who prayed, but also people who fought and people who, lobbied. You think about Thurgood Marshall, you think about Bishop Floyd Flake in New York, you think about so countless others who went to church on Sunday, but then by Monday, they were starting to fight again for the same civil liberties that all of us enjoy today. And so it's with that great love and great passion and appreciation for that sacrifice that I do the work that I do and remain committed to ensuring that not just faith, but voices of faith are allowed to enter into this space and present a vision of a Jesus who's trying to answer, what do we have to say to the people whose backs are against the wall? God bless you, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and look forward to hearing more about the impact that we made among faith leaders and those who are trying to push for change and using their faith as a fire to do so. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Reverend Mitchell. I know he can't hear me right now since that was a recording, but hopefully he'll be listening to the recording of this webinar and can hear our appreciation. Next, we have Ingrid Rothy, who is from the League of Women Voters.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be asked to speak with such a wonderful group of activists. I think that maybe Rabbi Bonnie has sent out a list of some of the history of voting in the United States. And I think I'm going to see a slideshow. There we go. Thank you. So we can go back up to, thanks. We can go to the next slide. So there is a longer version of this, and I'm going to go very quickly over what are in these slides. But in this one, I want to point out that 1789, the Constitution grants states the right to establish voting rules. There's a whole series of things that happen to shrink the number of people who are eligible to vote, including, well, for the next 100 years. In 1870, the 15th Amendment prevents states from denying the right to vote based on race, color, or condition of servitude, but Jim Crow laws and disenfranchised most blacks and poor whites. Next slide, please. Our very checkered history of a few steps forward and steps backward continues in 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which did a lot to protect minority voting rights, was passed. But then, and it was renewed 4 times. But in 2013, the United States Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, although it's still, portions of it are still operative. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, thank you. So now we're in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, at one point, did have something of a record of trying to expand voting and make it more accessible to all people. But beginning in 2008, we passed a whole series of laws to make it more difficult to register, requiring a voter photo ID, and making it more difficult to obtain one of these very few documents that would work for as the voter ID. These actions disproportionately affected minority voters, students, low-income people, seniors, anyone who moves a lot. And that's sort of the Wisconsin world we're in today, except of course, now we also have to deal with the results of the coronavirus. Next slide, please. So I was asked to assemble a history and then also to talk a little bit about how can we encourage people to vote. So I wanted to suggest that if you think about why do you vote, that will help you reflect more on what you can say to people who may have some questions about whether or not they should vote. So these are some common responses to why people who vote choose to vote. I would like to add that if you're speaking to young people, teenagers or early 20s, we don't teach civics in the schools anymore. So not everybody understands anymore how the government works well enough to understand where the role of voting might fit in. But in any case, you can see here on this screen various reasons for why people think that it's important for them to vote. Next slide, please, Bonnie. This is what people have said in a variety of polls about why they don't vote. And you've already heard several people refer to some of these. My vote doesn't count or doesn't matter. Candidates are all the same, doesn't matter who gets into office. I'm not political. I don't follow the issues. I don't have time. I can't get off work. It's too hard to register or to get a photo ID. And now this year, it's too dangerous to go to the polls. So next slide, please. What can we do when we talk to people about this? I think you have to listen to what they're saying about when you have the opportunity, when you're speaking to small groups or one-on-one. What is their concern about why they are not interested in voting? Because their concerns could vary a lot, and you may have to try to figure out a plan with them to make it possible for them to vote. So my recommendation to help people who aren't political or don't follow the issues, one, there are some sources of information about the candidates or the issues that will be on the ballots. Since I'm from the League of Women Voters, of course, I put on the screen a link to the leagues. This is the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, where you can see their 411 answers, or you can go to the Dane County League, which will work for those of you in Dane County. I also find it useful to find out what organizations they trust and whether those organizations have positions that they might be interested in or might at least want to talk about. And finally, I recommend asking voters what they think the government should do and how they think that could be accomplished as a way to opening up why it might be important for them to vote. And sometimes the important things that bring people to polls are small local issues, and sometimes, of course, and we expect in November, will be large national and international issues. But I mean, sometimes it's a question of whether the bus stops are shoveled in the winter. Next slide, please. So what about people who don't have time to go to the polls or who are afraid to go? We have, prior to this epidemic, made a lot of improvements and ways to make it easier to get to the polls. We have early voting, which has been curtailed because of in the last election because of the pandemic, but that gives voters more options about when to go. In the April election, there was a lot of use of absentee ballots, and I think we should still encourage this. People can request an absentee ballot at myvote.wi.gov. But there are some problems with this. It's not for everyone, but for people who can do this, which means they have access to the internet somehow or to a computer that perhaps they can go to their local library if it's open. And they may need to upload a valid photo ID if they don't already have one on record with their clerk, and so they may need help with that. Another option is they can verify that they are indefinitely confined due to age or infirmity, although many people don't like this choice, but it is perfectly permissible for people who are concerned about physically going to the polls to choose this option. And you don't, in that case, need to upload a picture of your ID. Next slide, please. There are other ways you can request an absentee ballot if you and the voter agree that the best thing for them to do is request an absentee ballot. There are written forms. You can check with the local clerks of wherever you're working and find out what the options are for requesting an absentee ballot. Some clerks permit an email with the voter's name and address. So it's not just new people who don't usually vote, but even people who vote a lot may want to request an absentee ballot if they haven't already because of their concerns about the pandemic. One thing that we think is important is we hope that people will do this now, early, before the November election, before the August election, so that the requests will go in and won't overload the clerks right before the elections, because there are many other things the clerks are going to have to be doing before the elections. And so we want to get this rolling now. Next slide, please. So even after you've succeeded in getting people to request an absentee ballot, they may still need help. So absentee ballots are not, as I say, the panacea for the difficulty, but it's a tool that we need to use as much as we can. A big problem we discovered in the April election is the need to have a witness sign. If people either live alone, so it's not easy for them when they're sheltering in place from a pandemic to get a witness. It is possible to organize to help them. Also, people who are voting for the first time, maybe, but who live with people who aren't citizens, may need assistance in finding a witness for their absentee ballot. Next slide, please. Some people don't want to vote by absentee ballot or can't. So there are other options, and we need to help the clerks focus on how to make voting accessible to anyone. Another problem we noticed with absentee ballots this last time around was that in some places there was some difficulty with having them delivered. I suspect that mail delivery problems are perhaps worse in low-income neighborhoods, so that people may not feel that relying on the USPS is exactly what they want to do. This is the kind of thing you can explore with them. The clerk can do things like early voting, curbside voting, and just making the polling place safe for people to go to on election day. In Wisconsin, we value the right to go to the polls on election day, and in some cases, people need to go to the polls. People who aren't registered by the day of the election must go to the polls in order to register. And so we need to help the clerks make sure that it's safe for people to go to the polls. They don't have to stand in line forever, and that there's sufficient cleaning going on there. Next slide, please. So I, of course, put some places up where you could ask for assistance. If you don't know if there's a local league of women voters in your area, you can find out at this site here. Just go to the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and click on join your local league. You don't have to join, but you will be able to see where all the local leagues are. Or you can contact the Voter ID Coalition. The number is also behind me here, 608-285-2141. Voters can call for assistance. You could call for assistance, and so we'll get back to you and chat with you. So I want to thank all of you for all the efforts that you are doing and will be doing to help make sure that everyone who wants to vote has an opportunity to exercise that right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. And our next speaker will be Barbara McKinney from the Madison Common Council.
Thank you very much. First, thank you for the invitation for me to come and to speak about why it is important to vote and to encourage people to vote. And I did see the slide where it listed why people don't vote. But what I say is that voting gives you say so in the matter. Say so in the matter is national elections, state elections, but local elections, who will be representing you. And as I'm having conversations with younger adults who are not registered, I ask them, what's missing for you? What should be there for you? And it is important to hear their perspective. So for me, I'm an elder and I was raised in Mississippi. My father never voted. And historically, I understood the importance of the vote. I've been a chief inspector since 2006, but this past election, the primary, stood out for me because there was one young African-American woman who came into the site wearing a face mask, protective gloves, and she said to me, "This is the first time that I have ever voted." And my grandmother said that I had to vote. And I registered her. I was behind a protective screen. I had a mask on. I had gloves on. But the fact that she listened to her grandmother, and her grandmother said it was so important for us to be recognized and that we mattered, that she took the risk and came out to vote. That's the kind of powerful thinking that we have to make sure that we are representing and saying that, because every vote does count. The first time I ran for a public office, I lost by 42 votes. Every vote counts. Every vote matters. Because if we don't vote, then that is a vote for someone who will not have our interest at heart. And so as far as the African-American population, how our vote is treated, how we're treated is very significant, but we have a say-so in the matter. One vote, one ballot. That is why there is a rush to keep us from going to the polls, and every opportunity trying to discount our right to vote. And so I am very pleased to be a part of this conversation. If it were not for the stay-at-home order, I'd be knocking on doors and saying, you know, I don't tell people how to vote, but I tell people to vote because you matter. And because you don't vote, you are saying, I don't matter. And so again, thank you for that opportunity to allow me to come and be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Barbara. Next speaker is Rabbi Dina Feingold.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. The prophet Jeremiah wrote, "Seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to God on its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper." While I never heard this verse quoted as I was growing up, I was raised in a family in which this maxim undergirded our lives in many ways. I look at my Jewish identity and the importance of civic engagement as twin gifts handed down from my parents to me and my siblings as a treasured inheritance. In my family, one would never consider missing religious school on Sunday morning or high holiday services, no matter what other compelling activities might beckon. And surely one would never miss voting in an election, no matter how minor the races or how few were on the ballot. Judaism and civic engagement were essential to our identity. It seemed to me like they were part and parcel of the same fundamental ethic. And I want to share this evening why I think they actually are. To be clear, it does not say in the Torah, "Thou shalt vote, I am Adonai your God." And yet, there are many statements like Jeremiah's in Jewish tradition, urging us to seek the welfare of our communities and asserting that we Jews fare well only if the communities in which we live prosper. Since ancient times and up to this day, Jews have prayed for the welfare of the government in our weekly worship services. In the earliest post-biblical compilation of Jewish law, the Mishnah, it's declared, "Pray for the government's welfare, for without fear of it, we would swallow each other alive." The great medieval rabbi, Moses Maimonides, said that the purpose of supporting the government is to ensure public order. Another great medieval scholar, Nachmanides, said that the purpose of supporting the government is about the necessity of providing for social welfare. Therefore, throughout history, wherever we lived and whenever we lived in societies that allowed it, and of course, many times in history, we Jews lived in places that did not, but where it was allowed, Jews have been engaged in activities that might improve the community, and our people have shown a deep commitment to political participation. In a democratic society, the vote is the most basic act enabling us to fulfill this commitment. Indeed, the rabbinical organization to which I belong, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, said in its 2001 resolution on election reform, "Our tradition teaches us that the process of choosing leaders is not a privilege, but a collective responsibility." The sage Hillel taught, "Al tifros min hatzibur," do not separate yourself from the community. And Rabbi Yitzchak taught that a ruler is not to be appointed unless the community is first consulted. The resolution goes on, "This ethic of political participation has guided Jews to enthusiastically participate in the American electoral process and is epitomized by our traditionally strong voter turnout. Jews have also placed a priority on voter education and registration efforts." I conclude with a story. A story is told of the great rabbi of the early 20th century known as the Chazon Ish. A man in his community came to the rabbi and explained that he didn't have enough money to pay his taxes and therefore would not be allowed to vote in an upcoming election. The Chazon Ish responded, "You should sell your tefillin and pay the taxes." Now stop to explain that tefillin are leather straps and boxes that are worn by traditional Jewish worshipers and in the Orthodox community, only men. And they have inside of them scrolls, handwritten scrolls with the words from Deuteronomy, the Shema prayer, "You shall love God with all your heart and soul and might." So these are very costly items and very much cherished by a person who has them. So the Chazon Ish says, sell your tefillin and pay the taxes. Tefillin you can borrow from another, but the right to vote you cannot get from someone else. Thankfully, in the United States, while we are seeing many troubling barriers to voting being implemented today, the 24th Amendment does protect one's right to vote regardless of taxpayer status. But the story of the Chazon Ish shows us that voting is so important that if need be, one should even sell one's tefillin, a symbol of one's commitment to observing the commandments, in order to be able to do so. The Torah may not say, "Thou shalt vote," but in practice, Jews have acted as if it was the 11th commandment, and it is our sacred obligation to do so in a free society. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Feingold. Next on our schedule is Ali Muldrow from the Madison School Board. Is she on the line or with us? I don't see her on the list. Ali, if you're there, could you speak up? Not hearing a response. We are also hoping for words from Alderman Ashanti Hamilton from the Milwaukee Common Council. Ashanti, are you here? Are you with us? Well, in that case, we will move on to Jeremy Gregert, who is a member of the Eau Claire City Council.
All right, hello. Thank you, Peter. Thanks everybody for having me here. So yeah, I'm Jeremy Gregert. I serve on the city council up in Eau Claire, city of about almost 70,000 people, up in kind of northwest central Wisconsin. I've been serving for about 2 years on the council. I have a 3-year term, represent an area that includes the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. So there's always a lot of voter education and outreach that's required with that, and engaging new voters. So that's always kind of a great experience. I was really a pretty involved citizen for maybe a dozen years before I decided to run for city council, and the active was a pretty good way to engage and really make a difference in my community. And I got to know my city council members. I got to know staff at the city level, and I was involved in the county level a bit too. But I was making a pretty good difference on the issues that I cared about, and got to focus on them, trying to make the city a more bike and pedestrian friendly place, working on clean energy, working on revitalization for our downtown. So I really got to focus on the issues that I liked and I wanted to spend my time on. Eventually I realized, and enough people asked me to run for council, that there's just a whole host of issues that could use some more inclusive decision making, just involving the public more in decisions. And so I really decided to, run because I learn more myself, but also be able to help make sure people were represented by someone that may be a bit more like them, or it could help, or just was more interested in what their issues were as well. I think, in order to vote, it's really, in order to be an informed voter, I guess it's one thing to vote, but to be an informed voter, it helps so much to get involved in checking out what's on the agenda at city council, and showing up an email to your representative, and starting to advocate and learning how the city works, and learning how your local government works. It's such a powerful way to get excited about voting, especially in some elections that not as many people are voting in. So I consider voting to be kind of like the responsibility of going to the dentist a couple times a year. It's a really responsible thing to do. You're kind of doing basic domain or yourself if you're going to the dentist. And just as you are with voting, you're kind of doing that basic responsibility that's proactive, difficult, things like that. So we need to fight for the right to vote. You need to fight for basic health care too. And then I think about, how I mentioned, being involved as a citizen, it's a kind of a day-to-day effort, like watching your day and kind of doing that level of responsibility, to have healthy teeth and have democracy. So the way I look at it, the kind of the dynamic between this and engaging with your elected officials, but also kind of on a day-to-day basis, but also voting. Just kind of for some perspective, 2 years ago, it was also a Supreme Court race, and that's when a lot of local elections were occurring too. That's when I was elected. There's 5 district city council seats in Eau Claire, and 4 of them were challenged by kind of younger candidates like myself. And it was very rare. It was kind of Eau Claire nice, like it was something you didn't do, is you didn't like actually challenge people who were in office. You didn't go after seats that were held by incumbents for 20 years. So that was like the Eau Claire nice thing to do, is to not do that. But we decided, that we would just give it a try at least. And people really were excited to actually have a choice on the ballot. For my seat, there hadn't been a choice on the ballot for almost 15 years. There was always just one name. So, and one of the 4, and all 4 of the people that of those, district seats that were challenged, like we won all of those seats. And everybody was just kind of shocked because no one had ever really tried to do that before. So some of it, I think, is just getting out there and doing things that people think are not gonna make a difference, but trying it is really kind of an exciting thing. And one of those 4 challengers who won, and now I serve on the council with, won by just over 20 votes. So and that's out of a seat where 13,000 people could have voted. So I guess just to, so I think, making sure that elected officials are, kind of held accountable is going to vote for next. I think, as someone who's now in the elected position, sometimes we really need backup from the public. If you want to see something happen, like if we haven't gotten a single email about a vote we have coming up, or don't have anyone show up at the public hearing, sometimes it's hard to tell how we should vote or how we can really represent the people in our district. So making sure, even if it seems like something that's kind of a slam dunk, sometimes it's actually good to just, get in the habit of contacting your elected officials. It just helps you learn the issues and learn who you're voting for in the future. Because essentially, and Ralph Nader, would often say, advocate for so many years. He said, if you're not turned on to politics, politics will turn on you. Now, that was always something that resonated with me as a student, and kind of got me thinking, like, well, if I'm not voting, then, I don't have a voice in this. And and if I'm not paying attention and I'm advocating, then, other people are going to advocate, and they're going to not maybe be corporations that I'm not going to agree with so much or something. But I would say, being in that elected official spot, another, there's someone that, named Mark Reynolds, who maybe none of you have met, but he's a climate activist with Citizens Climate Lobby. He said that politicians do not create political will, they respond to it. So I think that's another important thing, is they don't just respond to the people at the voting booth, they respond to where the grassroots is. So making sure you're including kind of your voice, not just at the polls, but kind of on a day-to-day basis, is something I just wanted to share. So that's what I have for you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. And now we will hear from Reverend Greg Lewis, who's with Souls to the Polls and pastor of St. Gabriel Church of God in Christ in Milwaukee.
You know, I'm the assistant pastor there, so we need to fix that before I get in trouble. But a very active assistant pastor, let me tell you. But, it seems kind of like we're solemn here because, it seems like the atmosphere is a little bit down, I guess, because of the decision. But, we have all kind of opportunities here, and we have to help each other out. I mean, black, white, all the races have to come together and fight together, and I don't know about you, but, I'm a fighter, and, I like a good fight. I think that we need to ask ourselves the question, am I my brother's keeper? And yes, I am. I am my brother's keeper. And we need to encourage one another. And I want to encourage you tonight because, this is, nothing. What we're facing here is coming, so we have to get ready for a great battle. But I think, the victory is already ours. I know I'm talking like a preacher, but the victory is ours. See, we're the moral compass of our communities, and right is on our side. And, I remember I was watching The Godfather, and Michael was going to Cuba because Hyman Roth wanted to set up businesses there. And when he was going there, he was driving along and his chauffeur, and he saw something that really shocked him. There was one of the Cuban revolutionaries just tied down with dynamite. And he got out of his car and ran and jumped into a car of some of the Cuban army leaders, generals, commanders. And he gave his life and blew up those commanders because that was his resolve was just so powerful that he was willing to give his life for his country, the revolution. And when Michael got to the hotel and Hyman Roth said, Michael, you haven't given me your $2 million yet. And Michael said, I saw something. I saw this revolutionary give his life for his cause. And, an army that fights like that, I don't believe they can, he said, an army that fights like that and is willing to give up their lives like that, I don't believe they can lose. That's what I saw on April 7th, when I saw my people out there standing in line, risking their lives. I said, an army like that, we can't lose. That's why I'm so very, very hyped up and I'm geeked up about what we need to do, because I know people out here are willing to help, And I also know some of these people don't care about us, but they haven't cared about me since I've been born. So that doesn't bother me anymore. We still have to count bubble gum and recite the Constitution just to vote. They still put obstacles in our way, but that doesn't stop anything. I was even a victim of this virus. I like to die in my bedroom just to the left of me. but I survived it. And when I was dying, I was not afraid. So I knew that God was with me, and I knew that my faith was strong. I didn't start feeling any fear until I knew I was going to make it, because I know how hard life is. So we can't pretend like this is going to be easy. We have to navigate ourselves through these situations, and we have to continue to organize, and we have to organize as Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We have to organize like this. We have to put our powers together. We have to put our energies together. We can't lose, gang, because we are on the side of right. We need to continue to fight. We need to continue to register voters, get these people photo IDs, talk about absentee ballots. And some people are having problems with the absentee ballots, but I'll tell you something, I'm having problems with standing in line for 3 hours. I'm having that problem. I'm having problem with people who cannot organize themselves on the last day to go vote and get turned away over and over again. I think we need to vote early, and we need to vote absentee. And I don't, you know, there in Sherman and one of the areas in our city, they had 60% voter turnout, absentee voters, Sherwood. And that says something to me. If we can organize ourselves to educate our people, we can organize to make sure that people understand what happens with these absentee ballots, with these absentee applications. You know, we can't just talk about what's wrong. See, because life is not going to be smooth, gang. Life is never smooth. We always have to navigate situations because something's always going wrong. That's what this world is all about, going wrong. We are the moral compass. We have to navigate, get it back on track. And that's what we need to look at and how we need to see things. We're organizing churches right now. We're asking leaders to contact your members, members contact your relatives and friends and neighbors, and let's find out who's not registered. Let's find out who needs IDs, and let's get them fixed. Let's do that, and let's do as many as we can, because I believe if we do the work, God will bless it. And I just don't, you can't convince me that he won't. And we're getting ready for the purge. See, I'm not waiting for a bird to just fly in my mouth so I can eat. I'm going to go get a chicken, pluck it. I'm going to kill it. I'm going to do all the things I need to prepare myself for dinner. We have to do the work, gang. We have to do the work. So I'm asking everyone to help. Community, along with the faith-based organizations. Everybody's got to help. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about underground, overground, off the ground. Everybody has got to help. And we have to get this thing back in place. We have to navigate. We're the navigators. We have to stand strong together. So these meetings should not just be meetings where we just come out and just spew out all these ideas. We should be talking about how we're going to work together and how we're going to be effective doing it. And I just believe we're an army of faith. And there's no reason why we can't get 100,000 souls to the polls easily. That's what I believe, because I have already counted the numbers in my town. I know I have 500 preachers who can get 25 people minimum in their churches to vote. And they can get 25 people, and all those people could get somebody else. I've counted 100,000. I'm a dreamer, because I just believe that I'm tired of living this lie. I want something different here, and I'm willing to work for it. And if you're not willing to work, then you don't want to be with me, because I'm going to work until I can work no more. When I was sick, I was in my bed on the phone. That didn't stop anything. There are no excuses right now. We have to work. And I'm going to repeat this. If we do the work, God is going to bless it. I know he will. So we won't stop on November 3rd either. We're building power for the rest of our lives, gang. We're building that power base. And I'm not just talking about Black folks. I'm talking about Black, white, all the minorities. I'm talking about us finally getting over this fact that somebody's better than somebody else just because of your color. I'm talking about us working together to get things right so we can be the navigators of our lives and stop letting these people who don't care about us at all have a say-so about everything we do in life. Somebody's got to be with me on this. Everybody should be with me on this line on this. And we should work to the bone. We should work our hands to the bones to get this done. And I guarantee you we can't fail. So I don't want to see solemn faces the next time I see one of these meetings. I want to see us ready to fight and go and build together. If we can do that, we can't lose. I just want to God bless everybody and thank you for your prayers. As you can see, I'm healing and I'm ready to fight. So fight with me. Let's do this because we need all the help we can get. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Lewis. And I think Barbara McKinney also wanted to add something to her statement. So we'll hear from her again.
Thank you very much. And I thought that the first initial was introductions. Thank you for that very resounding presentation that just went before I'm speaking, because it is absolutely that energy, that resolve, and that commitment that has to move forward. I remember at the when President Trump was elected, I was working the polls, and when I realized that he was going to be the next president of the United States, I went home, got in the bed, and pulled the cover over my head. But guess what? The morning did come, and I had to get back to work. And so one of the reasons that this is so important is that we do need to do the work. The COVID-19 is merely an unmasking of the diversities that we already know that exist. Why voting matters? It matters because it is important that we are represented. And when I say we are represented, that means we collectively are represented. I was elected to the Madison Common Council in 2015 and was one of the first African Americans in the 105-year history of the Madison Common Council to be elected. That says a lot. That says that tenacity, the belief that you can make a difference is so important. That's what voting does. It is that you step in and you say, I want to make a difference, and either I'm going to be a part of the solution or I'm joining those that's a part of the problem. When I joined as part of the solution, being on the Common Council is not easy, but you do have the voice and the say-so of what matters. I spoke of the young woman who had said that she had never voted. And after she voted, I said to her, thank you, because it is not just you voting, it is that you are carrying on the legacy of those who never had an opportunity to vote before. One single vote does make a difference. Voting matters. Every vote counts. And it is something that defines who you are and that you matter. We must register every member in our household that is 18 years or older. We must not forget our seniors, and we must be responsible in making sure that the health and well-being of all of our citizens who choose to vote is taken care of. I was so happy that Historically, we talked about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and how comprehensive it was. I was glad to hear about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but the reality of it in the state of Wisconsin, there is a wide discrepancy of individuals who cannot vote, and that's the incarceration rate. And we talk about the Jim Crow Act, but that is a reality. If you are a felon and you are on paper, you do not have the right to vote. And so it is really time that not only all votes, but I'm specifically talking about the Black vote should not be an afterthought. The importance of Black voters to Democratic primary candidates has been clear for over decades, particularly in areas where there is a concentration of minorities. The African American voter in the year 2020 will make a distinctive difference in this election. We must get out to vote. I didn't speak of my dad who never voted in his life, but the legacy of why it is important to vote is critically important. I'm so excited about the energy of the last speaker. I'm excited about the opportunity. And guess what? We cannot do this by ourselves. We must link arms together and say that this is not right. And with the tenacity, the faith, and that's where it's all about, is that we don't know what will happen, but God knows. And so if we link our arms together and we do something that's right, we will prevail. And so I thank you so very much for the opportunity to just be in the midst of this tonight so that we can resoundingly join together and say that we are making a change. And so again, thank you for allowing me to come back on.
Thank you, Barbara. And I will now turn it over to Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, to lead us through short question and answer period and send us off. Bonnie?
Thanks, Peter. So thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here on this call and showing your support and your commitment to this important work. Thank you so much to our speakers. I am so proud to say that Barb McKinney is my alderwoman, and I love her so much. And Reverend Lewis, who I've become good friends with and who I also love so much. And you all need to know that Reverend Lewis is recovering from COVID-19, and if he can bring this level of passion and this level of energy when he is recuperating, none of us have an excuse to say that we are too tired or too busy or too whatever to engage in this work. We will be following up this webinar with a link to the recording and with some written information and with the link to our website. And Lauren or Jonathan, if you would put the website URL up in the chat, that would be great. We really want everybody to be engaged in this work. I know so many things have changed since we've been in social isolation, and a lot of things we thought we were going to be able to do on the ground have been moved online. We are very sad and very frustrated at the Supreme Court's decision tonight to stay the governor's safer at home order. Please continue to stay safe, and please try and stay at home. Despite the Supreme Court's order, that's what's going to keep us safe and healthy and alive. And particularly for our most vulnerable populations, the elderly, the African American, Latinx, and Native American populations that have been so disproportionately hit by this virus. Please help keep everybody safe and alive, but still continue to do this important work of getting out the vote. So thank you all so much. I want to see if there are any questions. Please put your questions in the chat box. And Lauren and Jonathan are monitoring the chat and will let us know if we have any questions for any of our speakers. And Jonathan put the URL for our Interfaith Voter Wisconsin Interfaith Engagement Project on the chat, so you can all check out our website and all of the resources that are there. We're going to continue to load that website with resources, and we are building a calendar. There are several people on this call right now who are involved with All Voting is Local and League of Women Voters and Souls to the Polls and other organizations. Please send us your information so we can put it on the calendar and share it on our website so we can get all of our volunteers connected with all the great work that everyone is doing. Jonathan, Lauren, do you see any questions? Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everybody for sharing your wisdom with us, your faith, your passion, your commitment to this work. We are, I think, all leaving inspired, and we thank you all so, so much. We will be in touch. Look for millions of emails from us. Thank you all, and good night.